And then there's Mike Starr, a good friend of mine from when we were starting XBRL US. He was number 2 at Grant Thornton and sort of their chief operating officer, and dealing with all the hard problems of getting an accounting firm to want to make these changes to come into this world of data standardization. Now he's at the SEC. He's deputy chief accountant. He's responsible for policy and market risk, 2 hugely important areas, and he's in the office of the chief accountant.
I'm actually waiting for the day when you just walk up and the machine automatically knows it's you and just put your presentation up. You don't have to go through that in front of 200 or so people thinking, you know, what if I push the wrong thing? You ever think about that? I've done that. It's very embarrassing. Thank you, Al, for that kind introduction. I hope I can just live up to about half of that. I should tell you before I start that the views I express today are mine, and they do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission, the Commissioners, or the other members of the staff of the Commission. And when you're talking about something as revolutionary as this, that's probably a good thing to say, whether it's required or not, if you want to keep your job, I guess. So why? Why am I here? Well, Al told you that I was involved at the beginning of the formation of XBRL US, but I'm not a technology specialist. I'm actually not an XBRL expert. So I guess I have to ask again, why am I here? I'm an auditor. Al mentioned that I was at Grant Thornton. I was actually there for 32 years. And while I held a number of different positions during that time, I never lost sight of the fact that I'm an auditor. You know, I've always been an auditor. I think I've been an auditor for a long time. And as an auditor, my values are drawn from the CPA Professional Code of Conduct. As an auditor and as a CPA, I have a duty to exercise professional due care in fulfilling my professional responsibilities and to act with integrity and objectivity in serving the public interest. In other words, as a CPA and an auditor, I have an obligation to call it as I see it and to set aside self-interest when serving investors. And today, I'm also a regulator. And as a senior officer in the Office of the Chief Accountant of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, I'm guided by the SEC's mandate to protect investors and by OCA's responsibility to oversee the financial reporting process to ensure that public companies provide useful information to investors. And that's why I'm here. To call it the way it is, without regard to self-interest, and to contribute to improving the usefulness and reliability of information provided to investors. Today I want to share with you some observations. My observations on how structured data is beginning to provide investors with better quality information more timely and more transparently. To review the current status of the SEC's XBRL program for financial information, to address some of the concerns that companies have raised as we've gone through this initial startup phase, to provide you with some insight into how the SEC is beginning to use tagged information, and then finally to review some near-term changes that will enhance the usefulness and reliability of the information for investors. Disruption and change. Sounds like an upbeat message, huh? Harvard School business professor Clayton Christensen, in his 1997 best-selling book, The Innovator's Dilemma, coined the term disruptive technology to describe a new technology that unexpectedly displaces an established technology. Disruptive technology lacks refinement, often has performance problems because it is new, appeals to a limited audience, and may not yet have a proven practical application. I'm not sure how many people outside a small core group 3 years ago would have called it disruptive technology, but I think there are a number who would have agreed with at least part of that definition about its limited appeal and concerns about whether or not there was a practical application for it. Christensen went on to demonstrate that it is not unusual to dismiss the value of a disruptive technology, only to be blindsided as the technology matures, gains a larger audience and market share, and threatens the status quo. And hopefully you've seen, and if you haven't, when I finish today, you'll have some understanding that this technology is disrupting the status quo. When we started the program to file XBRL information in 2009, the SEC had certain expectations about how that reporting would increase the amount of financial data available to investors. And there were 3 ways that the SEC said that would happen. First, an increase in coverage of smaller reporting companies by commercially available products that provide corporate financial data. Second, an increase in the level of financial data available in electronic format by these and other services as a result of tagging data. And finally, an increase in the number of suppliers of financial services products because of requiring companies to report interactive data. During the intervening period, we have seen costs come down significantly. And that's because there have been new and improved products and services introduced into the marketplace. We have seen the data aggregators either start or begin to start to use structured data and not model it manually, but actually pull it into their models. And we have seen new players come into the marketplace, players that didn't exist 3, 4, 5 years ago. So where are we? Well, today we're in the 3rd year of a 4-year phase-in. But make no mistake about it, these are early days in the introduction of XBRL. By the end of this year, we will add at least 6,500 filers. And as a result, it'll probably be another 2 years before we have completed the implementation of the XBRL mandate. At that point, we will have 8,300 filers at a minimum in the program. But there's one group that can't file yet, and that's the foreign private issuers. That requires that the Commission approve a taxonomy for IFRS as approved by the IASB. The staff of the SEC is working closely with the IFRS Foundation XBRL team to enhance the IFRS taxonomy. Let me be clear about our objective. We want all SEC registrants, including foreign private issuers, to file tagged information. I am hopeful that during the first half of 2012, the staff will be in a position to recommend the IFRS taxonomy for approval by the Commission. Rest assured that regardless of when the Commission approves that taxonomy, we will provide ample time for issuers to prepare for the initial filing of XBRL data. Al mentioned in the beginning, in the introduction, that I've been involved with XBRL for some time now. But when I first joined the SEC, I had other responsibilities. And the chief accountant and I apologize. Second embarrassing thing that happens to you. Fortunately, it's not my wife. Usually it's my wife calling me, saying, "Where are you?" But I wasn't involved initially. And then the chief accountant and I attended a meeting of the Committee on Corporate Reporting of FEI, and they had some concerns that they addressed with us. And shortly after that meeting, they sent a letter to Chairman Shapiro outlining those concerns in great detail. And at that point, the chief accountant asked me to look at their concerns and determine what we should do to address them and whether or not we needed to make any changes in our policies as a result of some of the things that they were experiencing in practice. First on their list was concurrent filing of the XBRL exhibit. Because of the amount of time it took to make changes, because of the amount of effort that went into the initial tagging, they asked if we could extend the period to file the exhibit by 5 to 7 days. I actually think at some point that grew to 7 to 14 days, but they started out at 5 to 7. And we listened to that, and we thought about it. And then we talked to the users of the information, just to make sure that what we knew intuitively they agreed with, and that is that the information has little or no value if it can't be consumed contemporaneously with the filing of the annual or quarterly financial statements. And as a result, we decided not to provide that extension. The second concern they had related to the amount of time and effort that they spent on tagging the detail tagging of footnotes, and whether or not company-specific information really needed to be tagged, and is there some way to reduce the level of tagging? We're sensitive to the effort and the cost that companies expend. But we know that whenever a change of this magnitude is introduced, it takes time for the marketplace to absorb the change and to adapt to it. That said, we're currently considering whether there is a need to provide better or modified guidance for the detail tagging of footnotes. However, I want to emphasize that our principal concern is that investors get the information that they need. The third issue that they raised, and you have to remember this was early 2011, the third issue that they raised was, does the marketplace have the capacity to handle the Phase 3 filers? Given what some of them were seeing, given some of the difficulties they thought they were experiencing, they were questioning whether or not there were sufficient resources to handle an additional 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 companies. To address those concerns, I think we merely have to look at the statistics from the filings that took place in the second quarter of this calendar year. For the second quarter, 95% of the Phase 1 and Phase 2 filers filed timely. 95%. And 5% of those filers, those Phase 1 and 2 filers, the remaining 5%, filed within the 30-day grace period. More importantly, 80% of the Phase 3 companies filed the XBRL exhibit timely in the second quarter of this year. At the end of the grace period, only 2%, just 2% of the Phase 3 companies had not filed the XBRL exhibit. And of that number, not surprisingly, 90% were small reporting companies, and of that 90%, 25% were shell companies. So they had no operations. To us, that means that those concerns about resource capacity didn't come to fruition. Let me touch on our experience at the SEC briefly. I think there are two things you have to take into account. One is that the staff, in monitoring and reviewing filings, looks at several sources of information to assist in that review. The second thing is that until we introduce Phase 3, we only have a small number of companies that are filing tagged information. That said, with limited data and capability, structured data has enabled the staff to more readily review certain types of disclosures for registrants. The staff has been able to look at certain types of disclosures across companies for consistency and comparability. The staff has been able to identify where there are outliers for disclosures of market-based information, where you would think that there would be a very tight range of disclosure. The staff has been able to identify those that appear to be outliers, something that was a very difficult, time-consuming process, if doable at all, without structured data. Another example is that there are situations where the staff needs to identify companies whose operations are in a specific region or jurisdiction, and with structured data, that can be done very quickly. One of the questions that we frequently get is, when will the SEC staff start issuing comment letters on tagged information? You know, we're still in the transition phase, and I don't know and I can't answer that question today. However, I can tell you that some companies have already received comment letters where a comment was generated based on a review of structured data. So if you look forward, it's real clear that the use by the staff will increase, because in a short period of time, all companies that file with the SEC will be filing tagged information. But more importantly, this year, we were able to increase the number of software licenses for data analysis tools for our divisions of corporation finance and enforcement by 5-fold. So not only going forward will we have more data, but we actually have more capability going forward than we did just a year ago. we have a small but dedicated team at the SEC that focuses on XBRL. And one of the things that they do is they are in constant communication with the marketplace. We are talking to the preparers, the financial intermediaries, investors, to understand what's happening in the marketplace as we go through this significant transition. And what do we see? We see that technology improvements will continue to drive costs to produce and consume data down rapidly. I said earlier that aggregators are starting to use the data. That means that the offshoring of taking the data manually and putting in their models is going to come back into the U.S., again, driving the cost down. We've already seen in 2011 the number of companies bringing the tagging activity in-house begin to accelerate, and we think that trend will continue. The number of technology companies, there are a number of technology companies that are developing and distributing very specialized tools for authoring XBRL. Those tools will reduce the effort required to tag information. And the change that I'm waiting for most eagerly is we know that we are aware of a number of startups and existing companies that are working on consumption products for individuals. And I'm sure that there are more that are doing so in stealth mode. We've already seen tremendous disruption. Those of you that are in the service business, providing services, those of you who are manufacturers of tools to review and author, review, analyze data, are already seeing some of the disruptive changes. Some of you are benefiting from them, some of you are suffering from them, I suppose. Those of you with companies are seeing the same thing. This last item is a true game changer. This is the one that will really make a big difference. The last change that we're seeing that I'll mention is industry groups are beginning to convene to consider standardization of taxonomy extensions and disclosure formats. Standardization of extensions and disclosure formats will lead to clearer, more focused disclosure. And investors will benefit from that. And I hope that standard setters take notice of it. I want to emphasize 3 points. The cost is declining and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. The marketplace is continuing to introduce new and improved tools and services to produce and analyze structured data. The use of that data is increasing and will continue to increase as the amount of data available increases and as new and improved tools become available. The most effective regulatory tool we have is one that provides the capital markets with quality information, timely and transparently. Just consider the recent financial crisis and past financial scandals. There is no doubt in my mind that transparent, timely, quality information can be a safety belt for our economy. I want to thank XBRL US for having me here today. I want to thank all of you for all that you've done as we move forward in what I think is truly a revolutionary change. I appreciate your efforts as pioneers in this regard. I also want to recognize the efforts of that small, dedicated team at the SEC that I mentioned earlier. Walter Hampshire, Tony Mealy, Ted Eulinger, and Susan Yount. Without their commitment and dedication, this program simply would not be possible. Finally, I want to thank Jeff Nauman, who just recently returned, much to my chagrin, to private practice. Jeff provided the leadership necessary to guide the SEC in this program during its startup phase, and without his leadership, we would not be here today. Again, I thank you. I hope you have an enjoyable conference. I started to put this first question in my presentation, but I knew somebody would ask me. So the question is, what is your perception of the concerns over the expiration of the limited liability for Tier 1 filers, especially given we're still on a learning curve with technology tools and vendors? You know, I understand the concern. You know, we talked to CCR, the Committee on Corporate Reporting for FEI, about this extensively. It's a difficult issue. That said, I think the right decision is not to extend it. I think 2 years is a good period to have a limitation on the liability, but we need to ensure that companies are taking seriously, and I know they are, but we need to ensure that companies are taking seriously filing quality tagged information. So while I understand the concern, I can tell you that extension, that limitation of liability, is something that won't happen. One other thing that I should point out is that the extension really just gave you the ability, I think, to correct mistakes when you found them. So I know that's probably not a satisfactory answer, but that's the answer. I don't know the answer to the next one, but if Tony Mealy's here, he probably does, and I'm sure he'll be happy to tell you. But the question is, is Tony here? Is he? Yeah. Okay. I see him making his way forward. I'll go to another question while he comes up, because I know he can. I hope he can answer this one now that I put him on the spot and said he could. This is probably another question for Tony, but I'll take a shot at it. Then he can come up here and correct me. What do you envision as the next horizon for XBRL reporting and SEC filings? In other words, MD&A, proxies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, one of the things that we hear most frequently, this is from investors, is they would like, and we don't regulate this, but they would like to see earnings releases tagged. I don't know what will be next. I can tell you this. I think there is surprisingly a big appetite on the part of regulators to tag more information. I think most regulators understand the benefit that's derived from having access to tagged information. What's next will depend on what we hear from the marketplace in setting priorities. In case you haven't been following events in D.C., money is tight these days. the question for Tony, now that he's made his way up here, is not that one. Not that one. I lost it. Do you know how many downloads of XBRL data are coming off Edgar on a daily basis?
The Edgar system, being a US government system, can't use cookies and doesn't actually track a lot of information on who's downloading information. It's a government-wide requirement that we don't track that. So there are do have a rough idea. Most of the information that is disseminated in bulk. People either pick up the FTP files or they're part of the broader public dissemination system. In terms of people going into the individual companies and looking at it, again, that's not really tracked. So it's an incomplete answer, but it's the best information I've got at this time.
The next question is, did the cost of XBRL implementation for filers exceed, meet, or come in below your original expectations? If you go to the website and pull up the final rule, you'll see what the original expectations were. And I can tell you that, just my back of the envelope analysis, and I did this again this morning, actually, in anticipation of that question, is that those costs today are significantly below the original expectation. So we've seen, I said it earlier, we've seen a dramatic decline in the cost. And based on my discussions, and those discussions are very recent, my discussions with providers, those costs continue to come down. There's a lot of competition in the marketplace right now. In fact, I was talking to one provider mentioning what I'd heard without attribution to anyone, and he must have thought that I was a potential customer because he cut the price in half. This is an interesting question. Why does the SEC expect more, clearer, focused disclosures and not less? I think it's possible that one of the things that we're going to see is companies starting to clean up their disclosures and becoming more focused on the value of the disclosures. I don't know if you would consider that to be less, but I think it is possible that it will become more refined and there'll be less extraneous information that just accumulates over time. I have nothing to back that up other than that's just what I've heard from some people and what makes sense to me. Do you believe that XBRL would experience broad adoption without a regulatory mandate? Has anybody been to China? There's a, I know I'm a federal employee, but so you may not look at this answer as completely objective, but despite some of the things that we hear today, there's a lot of good that government does. And I happen to think that mandating XBRL was one of those good things. Would it have happened? Probably. Would it have happened as quickly? Unlikely. Do you have time for another crisis? I don't think so. Do you anticipate that XBRL filings will require to be audited in the future? Again, I'm probably the wrong person to ask, but the way I look at those types of requirements is it depends on what the marketplace needs or wants. It depends on how valuable that information is. I think it's possible that at some point in the future, the focus will be on the tagged information. Does that mean we'll be auditing tagged information? I guess it does. You have to understand where I come from is I think that textual information is going the way of the printing press. It's going. So I think eventually it will be audited, but that's pretty far out, so I wouldn't go out and make any investments based on that answer. The EGR filing manual is written in very technical language. Has any thought been given to creating a translation of sorts in plain English for those who lack computer language skills, perhaps an EGR filing manual for dummies? Whoever wrote this, you probably could find a ready market for it, I guess. No. Frankly, I don't think consideration has been given to that. But if enough people ask for it, we'll look at it. And Al, I think, unless there are more questions, those are all the questions. Okay. Thank you. Enjoy your conference.
So just a couple of housekeeping issues while we've got everyone here. The conference sessions are all on this level, with meals and breaks right next door with our exhibitors. Please keep, obviously, please keep your cell phone ringers, tablets and notebooks muted so all participant speakers can be heard. Don't hesitate to ask anyone from the XBRL team about the event or the facility. In addition, you might also see folks outside this room in teal jackets. These are the Opryland staff, and they're ready to help you as well. If you're sharing details from our conference via Twitter, be sure to include the hashtag #XBRL 2011, which is #XBRL 2011, so others can tune into your message. And CPE is available for the XBRL Essentials programs, so you'll hear more about how to get CPE at the start of each of those sessions. And for future sessions, there'll be cards available too, so you can obviously ask questions. Thank you. We're going to have the next panelists up here, I think, so if we could ask them to come up.